Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, this afternoon, for our first webinar from NLAAD campaign this year, 2018. Before we go ahead, I want to let you know that all the lines have been muted to avoid background noise interference. And there is a question and answer box on the bottom of your screen. You can share your questions there in the chat function. There will be time for questions at the end of the webinar. And also, this meeting is being recorded. Before we go ahead with the webinar, I just want to let you know that the NLAAD event registration are open in our website, and also the following link, the one that appears on the screen. And you can also request HIV test kits from us, from our website, or doing a link, going to this link on the screen. We have a Lear, INSI, and Oral Quick test, maximum of 25 kits per event. You can choose which you prefer to use, the one that you use normally. We will send the order to the organization that will provide that to you directly. Today's webinar is U equals U and detectable equals transmittable. I am Luis Mares, the Director of Community Mobilization Programs at the Latino Commission on AIDS, and today's presenter is Bruce Richmond. Bruce is the founding Executive Director of Prevention Access Campaign and Detectable Equals and Transmittable. U equals U is a growing international movement to share the revolutionary but largely unknown fact that people living with HIV on treatment with an undetectable viral load cannot transmit HIV to sexual partners. In 2012, 9 years after his diagnosis, Bruce learned U equals U. After recognizing that millions of people with HIV and the public were not being informed about this groundbreaking science, he joined with activists and researchers to ensure the science reaches to the people it was intended to benefit. U equals U is based on the principle that all people living with HIV have a right to accurate and meaningful information about their social, sexual, and reproductive health based on science and not stigma. Bruce and the U equals U campaign have been featured extensively in national and international media, including the Washington Post, CBS Evening News, China Global Television, CBC Canada, and The Lancet. Bruce was honored as Healthline Magazine's HIV 2017 Person of the Year, and Plus Magazine #1 Most Amazing HIV Plus People of 2018. He received the 2017 Partnership Award from National Association of State and Territorial AIDS Director, NASDAQ. Bruce has worked in philanthropy and social change for over 25 years, developing cause-related initiatives for high-profile people and brands. He received his Master's in Education from Harvard Graduate of School of Education and his JD from Harvard Law School. So here I'll leave you, Bruce, to present U equals U.
Great, thank you, Luis, and thank you to the Latino Commission on AIDS for giving U equals U this platform to get the message out. I really appreciate it. Just starting off, I just wanted to give folks a little bit more time to join, and I'm going to share with you a song from William and Danny from Kampala that just to give you a sense of the scope of the campaign around the world. There you go. So I want to just thank William and Danny if you're listening. That song has been played all over the world at the beginning of our presentations to just kind of convey the joy and the activism behind the campaign. But first, before we also get started, I want to introduce the session with the introduction to the largest AIDS conference in the World AIDS Conference this past summer in Amsterdam, with Dina Riquet-Bonds, who is the chair of Transgender Europe and director at the International Committee on the Rights of Sex Workers in Europe. This was the very last thing that she said during the opening plenary.
Lastly, we need the undetectable is untransmittable, or U is U, message to become standard knowledge worldwide. needs to sound louder every day, as this eases the burden of stigma and self-stigma of people living with HIV. It will save lives. It will reduce suicide and murder on trans sex workers especially.
So thank you to Dina for that. The U equals U was a topic, a very important topic throughout the World AIDS Conference. And at the end, I'm going to bring back another person who will share with you her thoughts on U equals U. So today I'm going to talk about what is U equals U, what's the message, what's the science behind it, why is it important, why don't we know about it, and then the movement. So how do we get this science out to the public? It was a very deliberate, strategic, sometimes painful process to get this science out of the dark to the people it was intended to benefit. And during that part, I'm also going to talk about how you can join the movement and share U equals U with your communities. So just going to jump past Dina. And so what is U equals U? I think most people have a sense of it at this point. I've heard about U equals U. But specifically, it means that a person living with HIV who has an undetectable viral load and is taking their medicine as prescribed cannot transmit HIV to their sexual partners. And the number to remember for this is 200 copies per milliliter. So we use undetectable as equivalent to viral suppression. Undetectable is a moving target in many parts of the world, and for the purposes of untransmittability or just figuring out if someone can transmit HIV, the accepted number is 200 copies per milliliter. So I'm just going to say that again. Someone could have a viral load of 150 copies, 199 copies, and technically still be considered untransmittable. And that means they have they're virally suppressed, but their viral load in the United States, in most places in the United States, is not undetectable. In the United States, it's typically under 40 copies, sometimes under 20 copies. In other parts of the world, the viral load, the measurement for undetectable is higher. In some parts, it's even 1,000. So it's important to keep in mind the number is 200. So NIH Office of AIDS Research recently called this a game changer. We keep hearing that a lot. It's a game changer. William and Danny did a song about it called Game Changer. So why is it a game changer? Well, this is why I got involved with this campaign. People living with HIV, so many of us never conceived of a time when we could love, we could have sex, we could have babies without fear. Fear had been a part of the most intimate moments of our lives. I was diagnosed with HIV in 2003, and I was so afraid of transmitting HIV to someone that I loved that I didn't love. I isolated myself. So U equals U radically transforms our social lives, our sexual lives, reproductive lives. We're seeing people who hadn't dated and been isolated in the past and depressed are now dating and having babies. One of the first times I did a workshop in 2016, a woman stood up and said, I can have a baby. I can have a baby without artificial and costly means of insemination. And a year and a half later, she's bringing her child to conferences. So that should be enough of a reason to spread this message far and wide. But there's more. So we used to say that stigma was the greatest challenge, and we still do, say that stigma is the greatest challenge to ending the epidemic. But for a very long time, we've also been exaggerating the risk from people with HIV and perpetuating stigma. Now we have this unprecedented opportunity to dismantle stigma. It changes the way we see ourselves, the way others see us, the way we're treated in healthcare settings, the way policy decisions are made about us in employment and housing and education and healthcare. So again, these two reasons are enough of a reason to get this message out far and wide. But there's more. So when I entered the field, I didn't know what the treatment cascade was, or the care continuum. But knowledge about U equals U has a tremendous possibility of encouraging testing. We're seeing, Mount Sinai Institute of Advanced Medicine in New York City using U equals U in their testing outreach. This could encourage people to go on treatment and stay on treatment and stay in care. And then this is really important for treatment advocates to understand. We used to have the argument that we need treatment to save our lives, and healthcare is a human right. Well, many of us, including myself, believe that with every cell in our body. But sometimes policymakers don't care about our lives, and they don't feel that healthcare is a human right because there's no enforcement mechanism. But what they do care about is preventing the spread of HIV and public health costs. So when you come to them from both sides, you say, healthcare, we need health treatment, access, and services to save our lives and prevent new transmissions and get us closer to ending the epidemic. That's a very powerful argument for access. So when you think about it, it's just this. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. It's just information. It's just spreading information, and it immediately improves the lives of people with HIV in so many ways, and brings us closer to ending the epidemic. So it's a game changer. Now, the science behind it. I'm not going to go in detail into the science. You can find that on our site or at AIDSmap or iBase. But there was a growing body of evidence, actually even before 2011 on here, back to 1998. But the main studies that were proved that U equals U were called HPTN 052, Partner, and the second phase called Partner 2, and Opposites Attract. And if you look at Partner and Opposites Attract together, there were 90,000 condomless sex acts. There were about 5,000 acts in Opposite Attract that included PrEP. So when you look at them together and you take that group out, 90,000 acts of condomless sex. And STIs were present, were not significant risk, and blips were very common, or a common situation for people with HIV. So when you look at those studies, just partner, the worst case scenario, the worst case is that you would have to have sex with someone once a week without condoms for 420 years. So if someone's HIV negative, they'd have to have sex with someone who is undetectable without condoms once a week for 420 years to be at risk of transmission. And when you look at the other studies, HPTN 052, which showed a 93% risk reduction from early treatment, and actually 100% risk reduction when someone was undetectable, those years go up and up and up. So the number here that we all really need to focus on is 0. There were 0 transmissions in any of these studies between HIV-negative people and their partners who are living with HIV. That means 0. 0 transmissions, 0 risks. And these studies prove what the consensus statements in the past had said, starting in 2008 with the Swiss statement, and there are several others as well, that an undetectable viral load is indeed untransmittable. So if there was this proof, if there was this growing body of evidence, why did someone like me learn in 2012 from my doctor that I couldn't transmit HIV? Why did other folks, some of our leaders in the community and people living with HIV who were connected to the medical establishment, why did they know, but virtually no one else knew? And all the information sites until the fall of 2016 were saying we're a risk. Well, here's the big reason. Science doesn't have a publicist. So there were all those individual studies that I mentioned, and studies like HPTN 052 was promoted very well by NIH, which funded the study. And Partner was a European study, so it was promoted by European agencies, Opposites Attract by Australians. So you have these individual studies going out, but the aggregate, so the combination of all those studies didn't have anybody kind of taking care of it and promoting it. So what you end up having is people that didn't have access to that information. They kind of just didn't know what was going on, and many people did. They don't go to the big conferences, and they're really kind of focused on what's happening in their own clinic and their own organizations. And then if people knew about those different studies, you have to have a certain level of expertise to make a conclusion on it, and authority and character. So you can imagine someone, perhaps in a large organization, who looks at these studies and says, wow, U equals U. And they go to the board, their boss or the board, and they say, no, you can't say that. That's a liability. Nobody else is saying it. And so it takes a certain kind of character and disposition and authority to be the first to come out and say U equals U confidently based on all the evidence. And then this was the most kind of disheartening and continues to this day. But, the medical and public health establishment has a really long-standing history of paternalism and prejudice that has given information providers permission to decide for people living with HIV instead of giving us the information to decide for ourselves, especially communities of color and marginalized communities that are already being left out by the healthcare system. So we've continued to see quite a bit of that, where folks like me, I'm a white cisgender male with health insurance. I was being told, I had a significant amount of privilege in order to get to undetectable and stay undetectable and get this information, while people who were already left out were not getting this. So there was just a very clear sort of classism and racism that we saw when we spoke to heads of clinics and medical associations. And then, resistance to change is understandable. For the first couple years of this campaign, that was acceptable. Now it's no longer acceptable to be resisting change, and we'll go into a little bit later how you can work with folks who are pushing back. But we're dealing with 35 years of fear of HIV and people with HIV. We have to unlearn so much of that fear and anxiety and the dogma that the condom is the only way to prevent HIV. And so that change is hard. It's called cognitive dissonance. So that's where we came in. That's where the movement came in. The science was there. We know this information is incredibly important to us and to the field itself, and there was strong resistance to it. We had this game-changing message with nobody taking care of it, nobody monitoring the media, nobody advocating and pushing the health ministries to update their websites and their treatment guidelines. So that's where this movement came in. And it was very exciting for all of us. It started in January of 2016 when we went to the researchers. Our first step was going to those top researchers from the studies that I mentioned and saying, hey, your research isn't getting out to the people it was intended to benefit. The researchers were sharing this information in their clinics. Dr. Cohen on the top right, Dr. Myron Cohen from HP Channel 52, was interviewed in 2011 and talking about how his patients would come to him to go on treatment and start treatment so they would not pass on HIV to their partners. So we were really happy that the researchers agreed to work with us on a consensus statement to prove that U equals U was true, and our aim was to use that statement to bring on influencers to confirm that it was true, and to use that statement to go to the U.S. federal health departments to advocate for a change in the messaging about HIV transmission risk, which we knew would change everything if we got the U.S. health departments to move. So first, surprisingly, the very first entity that signed on was New York City Department of Health and Dimitri Daskalakis. And once Dimitri signed on, around the same time, we had other leaders in the field, joining with us and supporting the campaign, and that we knew were allies. We started working with Rich Woliski, who has a Silence Equals Death t-shirt in the middle, and started a review process with the Federal Health Department to review the messaging on transmission risk. It was a hand-in-hand community and public health experts and researchers process. And then, as you see Carl Diefenbach on the right with Anne Rancourt, they started creating videos specifically for the campaign, even though the Health and Human Services and NIH, where they work, couldn't officially get behind it yet. And then on the bottom, the first campaign and sort of the leader kind of globally in this whole movement and creating campaigns and getting the message out is Terry Higgins Trust. We were very happy that they joined us. And then the activists started moving all over the world and using the consensus statement and the campaign to get their health ministries and their organizations, their aid service organizations, and communications agencies to sign on. So you could see on the top right that Chicago, Toronto, New York, Melbourne, Sydney, Mauritius, Paris, Kampala, Uganda, Madrid, Ivory Coast, Montreal, and Guatemala and Washington, D.C. And we'll come back to some of these images later. We have hundreds of photos. So the reason we all got engaged with this is because it's so important to us. It's so important to our lives. This is Roscoe, one of our strongest advocates who helped to get New York State Department of Health on board. And the word we see a lot is hope. We see a lot and we hear that a lot, that people feel hope because of U equals U. They write about it, they speak about it, and we feel we're no longer a threat. But we're outraged and we're angry that this information is not getting to all communities. We still have a long way to go. I really related to what Daniel said. Daniel's from Bogota, Colombia, and he said that even when there's a small risk, it's a heavy load. I used to see things like greatly reduced risk and extremely low risk and still feel like I was toxic. And he felt the same way. And he saw this campaign, and now he feels empowered, and he's an activist now in Colombia. Donna says that her womanhood was stolen by this disease. She says that now she has, again, a sense of hope and a new desire to love. Aileen, another one of our major activists in Louisiana, says that this gives her hope in healthy future relationships. And she's still screaming, U equals U. And Victor from Virginia, originally from El Salvador, just kind of encapsulates what this means for so many of us. U equals U sets us free. So activist and advocate strategies, we call it advocism. How do you become an advocate activist for U equals U? And what were some of the strategies that we used when we were talking to our doctors, when we were talking to heads of medical associations or research organizations or the federal government and health ministries? There's kind of this process that we used to convince people to get the message out. Usually we learn the science and we say that, we have a right to this information. You need to be basing your information on science and not stigma. And also at the same time, we generally look at the outcomes-based approach, that this is going to be better for your patients or your community's personal health and also public health, as we talked about. If all people have access to treatment and care and services they need to get to undetectable, will be propelled toward ending the epidemic. And then, unfortunately, sometimes we have to get to the shame. And this is the difficult part, because people don't like change, and especially people who are influencers and in positions of power. And when you come to them and kind of go through this, they may push back and dig in. And then we say things like, well, if you don't update your website, or if you don't stop telling your patients that they're infectious, by Friday we're going to do an article about you. And we're going to say that you don't believe Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Carl Dieffenbach, and the World Health Organization, and we'll go into that later, and you are harming people with HIV, which is malpractice if you're a doctor, because it's unethical to give bad information that's not scientific, that harms people when you tell them you're infectious. So really, usually things have come around, people have come around, they see that stigma is a public health emergency, and they know how much U equals U is an effective and immediate response. So after about that year, of 2016 when we issued that statement through 2017, things really started to move. The summer of 2017 was a summer of love for U equals U. This was an extraordinary moment when the mayor of Washington, D.C. and the D.C. Department of Health signed on to the campaign in June of 2017. Again, this is before the U.S. government endorsed the science. This was really early on, and I'm just going to play for you that press conference. We were so excited. And as the press conference was going on, U equals U was on buses and billboards throughout the city.
Today, D.C. becomes one of the first cities in the nation to support new HIV strategy called U equals U, which stands for undetectable equals untransmittable. And through this strategy, we're working to ensure that all residents living with HIV take their medication for consistent. This daily routine will suppress the virus until it becomes undetectable. When that happens, a person living with HIV will not transmit the virus. People living with HIV have long borne the brunt of a stigma associated with this disease. And now we will continue to work to make sure that they are empowered to take the lead on ending this epidemic. So we need
So I really want to honor Mayor Muriel Bowser for taking this step, and Michael Carfin is a man living with HIV in her department who moved this forward. These are real heroes, and this is guts, especially at a time when truth and science don't matter in our government. For Mayor Bowser and Michael to stand up is tremendous. Also, just about a couple weeks later, we had a press conference at the International AIDS Society in Paris, and the founder or pioneer of treatment as prevention said that the global medical and scientific community really confirmed U equals U. We were protesting in the hallways and taking the stage to make sure people know this is real and say U equals U.
My body, my right. U equals U. My body, my right. U equals.
And then, also that summer was really exciting because a few weeks later, we took the stage at the United States Conference on AIDS to demand that all people say U equals U and demand access to treatment so that everyone has the option to get there. Just after we took the stage, Dr. Anthony Fauci stood up and, flanked by two massive U equals U screens, said the science really does verify and validate U equals U, and later on said from a practical standpoint, the risk is zero. We were thrilled at this point, and several of us who were involved in the federal review process that I talked about earlier to review the risk messaging were just really excited and optimistic that the messaging would move forward. And then a couple weeks later, the CDC, Department of Health and Human Services, NIH, and other associated agencies confirmed there's effectively no risk, which changes the definition of what it means to be living with HIV and undetectable forever. That was a massive historic moment, and effectively, we need to just underscore means actually, but not officially, no risk. Or in effect, no risk. The VA updated their website to say U equals U and acknowledge the campaign. NIH OAR, the head of it, wrote about U equals U being a game changer. Dr. Goodenow. The World Health Organization, UN AIDS, has a U equals U fact sheet. Both are endorsing the science. The Lancet talked about the campaign, which is the #2 medical journal in the world. And now, because of the work of these activists around the world and the researchers and the public health agencies that worked with us, these heroes, we have 730 organizations from 95 countries, at least 35 languages, saying U equals U. There are also 21 health departments, most recently Arizona Department of Health and Washington State Department of Health signed on, and the city of Paris signed on with a press conference with the mayor. Now, I'm just going to show you the resources that you have to say U equals U, because we've got your back. Our campaign has collects a lot of resources that will be helpful, actually overwhelming amounts of resources around the world of how people are saying U equals U, and then we'll get more into the specifics of how you can say U equals U. What are some of the basic things to know? So I think the best fact sheets are from the New York City Department of Health, NIH, and the Well Project. So the best fact sheets in the United States. These three are on our website. The Well Project focuses specifically on women. And then for the third U, which we'll talk about too, not everyone has an undetectable viral load, and there are considerations and ways that this needs to be discussed and addressed when you talk about it. We have a page called the third U. There are also Spanish resources on the page. If you go to our YouTube channel, it says Spanish videos. And there are 8 Spanish videos that are great. And there's also resources from Amita Care and the Well Project again, and Apoyo Positivo. Undetectables from Housing Works. This was actually the first U equals U website in the country back in December 2016, also in Spanish. Minnesota had a campaign during the Super Bowl, and Boston had a campaign during CROI, a big HIV conference folks probably know about. And then Pride for Youth had this campaign focused on young people of color and transgender youth on railroad shelters. These are all outdoor campaigns and Planned Parenthood has joined. ACT UP Dublin was one of our earliest partners. I love this one. In the UK, in England, there are at least 8 national campaigns. They're really leading the way. And in France, there are at least 3 national campaigns. I'll show you we have one national campaign we just launched in the US. I equals I in Spanish and Portuguese, B equals B in Turkish, N equals N in Dutch, H equals H in Macedonian, K equals K in Vietnamese. The bottom is Chinese. On the right is Japanese. Top is Czech. Bottom left is Armenian. The center is Arabic, and far right is Russian, H equals H. The pharmaceutical companies have come on board and endorsed the campaign, and Grindr has about 30 translations of the campaign, and they allowed us to update their sexual health messaging on the app. There are videos on our website, lots of videos from all over the world that you can use. And now I'm going to show you a campaign that you can actually start using now. A lot of our partners have asked us if we had posters that they could print and download and other resources, posters to put up in their clinic or their aid service organizations. So we've been working on this campaign for about 8 months with Vive, and it's called Positive Series, Positive Stories. And it's based on the stories of 4 real people. On the far right, many people probably know Fernando de Hoya, who used to work at NMAC. But the concept was we wanted to educate about being undetectable and staying undetectable and encourage people to stay and care. But we wanted to do it in a mesmerizing, beautiful, and creative way. So we commissioned 4 artists to work with the 4 storytellers to create this original artwork based on their lives. And they're sharing personal details of their lives, so we're also starting conversations about what it is to be gay and Fernando's family, and how Katie recognized her gender identity and emerged in her gender identity, and Caleb's being a young black gay man and dealing with the racism. And so each of these has these personal stories wrapped in. And what you can do is actually customize the posters. You can download posters. You can add your own logos to them. And you can customize different ways of describing the risk. They're all accurate, but some folks don't like using effectively no risk. Some people like to use can't pass it on or do not transmit. You can also add information, add text, custom text about your organization, and then print it out as a palm card or a poster and make it your own. We know we take our website off, our logo off, Vive takes their logo off. We really want folks to have a sense of ownership over it. So you have posters that you can download, and there are also these really cool GIFs that are in English and Spanish. So there's posters, GIFs, and there's also videos that you can download. So I'm just going to give you a sense of this video. The videos can be downloaded in 5 subtitled languages.
I was born and raised in the beautiful tropical island of Puerto Rico. I had great parents and a very happy childhood. Like most kids, I started going out by senior year of high school. Going out dancing was a big deal, and I always had fun with the girls. Rumors got around, and my mother heard that I danced with boys as much as girls. Everything in my house became a religion. When they asked me to join a religion,
So I think you can get a sense of it, and we'd love you to go to the website and check out the different videos and see if they might be right for you and your organization. And so it's positiveseries.org. Now we're going to talk about more details about how you say U equals U. How do you communicate U equals U? What in our experience has been really important to communicate? Well, first and foremost, be consistent, be clear. You really can say can't pass it on now. You can say no risk. You can say zero risk. You're backed up by science. Because very minor word changes or cautious attitudes can really make a difference and be really harmful. So if you said to someone, look, I believe in U equals U, but just use a condom just in case, you're saying to them you're still dangerous. You're saying there's still a risk. You might say use a condom just in case to prevent other STIs and pregnancy, but you really don't need a condom if someone that you know is undetectable and knows they're undetectable. And also really focus on increasing the confidence and pleasure associated with it. This is an incredibly exciting message, and it's changing the lives of people with HIV. So if you focus on if you stay in care and you stay undetectable, you can have the kind of sex you want and live your life. So focus on the carrot, not the stick. We really have to move away from scaring people. So the nuances. Here are the nuances. The main nuances are stay on treatment. Take your medication as prescribed. Get your labs done regularly and stay in care and live your life. Have the kind of sex that you want. You cannot transmit HIV to your partners. Now, the details that you need to keep in mind, it's 200, as we said earlier. Remember the number 200. This is about sex. This isn't about breastfeeding or sharing needles. That's why we say sexual transmission. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's one option in the toolbox. There's also condoms and PrEP that can be used individually or together. There are many reasons why someone might want to use PrEP or condoms, but they don't need to be used for medically if someone is durably undetectable. If you don't know their status, you're not sure if they're adherent, or you want a sense of agency, it's okay to use condoms or PrEP. There's no shame in that. It's just these are all different options. But when you're undetectable, you cannot transmit HIV. Your partners don't need PrEP, and you don't need condoms to prevent HIV. Also, be mindful of disclosure laws. In many states, HIV is still unfortunately criminalized, and even if you have an undetectable viral load, you still may be subject to these laws. Right now, Sanjay Johnson, a man in Little Rock, Arkansas, is facing 8 to 30 years in prison for non-disclosure when he had a proven undetectable viral load. And please come to my Facebook page if you want more information about that. So what are some of the common concerns when you go through these? STIs. People are afraid. If I tell my patients U equals U, they'll stop using STIs. Well, educate them. You cannot hold one disease hostage for another, as Dimitri Daskalakis says. Educate your patients that an undetectable viral load does not prevent other STIs or pregnancy. These are separate things. And viral blips. We always hear, you're only as good as your last viral load test. That's an evil thing to say. Because right now, if you tell me that, I could be infectious right this moment, even though I was undetectable 3 weeks ago. Your viral load doesn't shoot up to infectious levels in between tests if you're taking your medication as prescribed. That's it. There may be blips, and blips are insignificant unless they start to increase over time, and that's why you stay in care, so that you can catch the blips. We're too stupid to understand what it means to be undetectable and that we need to stay on treatment. That one is easy to just address. It's up to sexual health educators to educate people with HIV, not withhold information from them because they think we can't understand. And virus in the semen, there is a really good document on our website from NIH to confirm that RNA and DNA in the genital fluids is not an issue. It's not shown to increase transmission risk. It's just an enduring myth. So don't worry about HIV and RNA and DNA in the semen. And then the risk is not zero. Well, that argument, it has to go away. There's never zero risk in science. You can't prove something won't happen. Right now, my head could explode. Right now, I could reach through the screen and shake your hand. You can't prove zero risk. So you don't develop public health messaging on it. And I'll show you the voice of the most important researcher right now who talks about zero risk at the very end. And we're evil. People with HIV are somehow inherently evil and will lie. The head of a major foundation in the U.S. told me that as we were sitting in his fancy office in New York City. Well, how do we protect HIV-negative people from that HIV-positive person who's going to lie and say they're undetectable? I don't really want to answer that question. We are not inherently liars, and it's a matter of trust and relationships. But it's interesting to see that kind of serophobia at the highest levels. We've got to be careful of that and mindful. Women in U equals U, as I said earlier, it doesn't apply to breastfeeding or chest feeding, as some folks might call it. There have been transmissions. And for more information on breastfeeding or chest feeding, there are many resources. As I mentioned, the Well Project, Hive, and Planned Parenthood are our partners. It also doesn't apply to needle sharing. However, people who use drugs do have sex. Keep that in mind. So Bill Cook from Scott County, Indiana, where there was the largest outbreak in the United States from needle sharing, was a very early partner in telling people who inject drugs about U equals U. They have a high viral suppression, like 72%, I believe, viral suppression in his area. People with HIV who inject drugs deserve to know U equals U too. It does not apply to needle sharing. And criminalization, this is really important. You know, we need to be mindful that U equals U is a defense in individual cases, but if used as the leading argument in policy reform, it could create a two-class system of people with HIV. So folks who are undetectable will be subject to the laws, and those who are not undetectable will, folks who are undetectable will not be subject to the laws, and folks who are detectable will be subject to the laws. And the people who are struggling with undetectable viral loads or don't have an undetectable viral loads are typically the people who are already being screwed over by the system and marginalized, and we have to be very sensitive of that. There are some great organizations working on this. So we're getting close to the end of this part, and I think it's really important to keep this in mind. V equals V. Mark King and Charles Stevens did a really intense workshop on Saturday. Are we shaming people who are not undetectable? We have to recognize that many people in the United States are not undetectable and around the world. And so in our communications, we must be conscious about that and avoid judgments. You know, recognize barriers to care. Just don't barge into a community and celebrate U equals U when people are struggling getting to U equals U. recognize it, and also acknowledge that treatment is a choice. You know, it's a choice, and we cannot force people to take treatment and to get to undetectable. It's not our responsibility to end the epidemic. It's an opportunity we have to be a part of the solution. But first and foremost, this is our decisions. And always use U equals U to benefit all people. Use it as a universal access argument. And what we always talk about is that people with HIV at any level of viral load can still have hot and safer sex. You could have a detectable viral load and be sexy and have the sex you want. So there's condoms in some parts of the world, PrEP. And we're seeing U equals U is offering hope to folks who are undetectable and detectable, and this new surge of activism. So right now you might be saying, you know, I'm not sure about this. You know, it's easy to go back to the old ways of thinking. U equals U seems like a big jump. But what we say is borrow confidence. Borrow confidence from the experts who know what sexual transmission risk really is. I'm not an expert. I didn't study this for 15 years. These folks did. And probably no one on this call, maybe, is an expert on HIV transmission risk. But these folks are, so we need to borrow confidence from the experts and borrow the passion from the activists and the stories from the activists all over the world that are saying this. This is Canada, Guatemala City, Ivory Coast, France, Japan, Tajikistan, New York City, Amsterdam, Kazakhstan. These are nurses in a government-funded program going out in the snow to say H equals H, which is U equals U. Kazakhstan, this is a teenage program. I'm sorry, this is Russia. This is a teen program in Russia saying H equals H. So, in closing with this part, I'm going to bring us back to the World AIDS Conference. And a pivotal researcher studying transmission risk, this was how her presentation was closed. I was actually fortunate to be able to ask a question, so you'll see a cameo from me.
Oh, it looks like we've got one more, and then it has to come from U equals U himself.
Hi, Allison. Today is marking a revolution of what it means to live with HIV, so thank you so much for your research. I have a question on behalf of the U equals U campaign. There are many providers that are still not accepting this message. They try to focus on the risk of not zero scientifically, or they focus on their patients aren't going to be adherent and they won't know that they're detectable, or they say there's a rise of STIs already, so they don't want to share this with the patients. We get every single kind of excuse. What would you say to clinicians or any other information provider who is withholding this information for people with HIV?
Campaign that's been astonishing. I think the time for excuses are over. I think it's very, very clear that the risk is zero. So I very much think that I think if you're on suppressive ART, you're sexually non-infectious, and yeah, the time for excuses is over. And I again pay tribute to you and your work.
Well said. Thank you.
So if anyone, I want to thank our sponsors too. So if anyone ever says to you the risk is not zero, just show them Dr. Allison Rogers on our website and she'll tell them the truth. So the ways to get involved is, you know, if you would sign on right now as a community partner, and you'll get a lot of information from us. It's really easy to go to our website and sign on. Get educated. Again, trust the experts. Don't trust people who are not experts. Don't listen to some person on social media who doesn't know what they're doing. Our page has tons of information from the experts. Please share it in ways that work for you and your communities, and participate in trainings. We have some trainings that are coming up. We'll be announcing soon. And organize. There's lots of protests still going on around the world. Definitely connect on social media, #U equals U, and there's our website, and also my email in case you have questions. And definitely check out positiveseries.org. You can actually really start using those right now. You can also join the Donate a Photo and share the message while raising funds for the campaign. So that's about it. Thanks for your time. I think we have some time for questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Bruce. This was an amazing presentation with lots of new information about U equals U. We have so many questions here.
Wow.
You can see.
Oh, the beeping noises.
Yeah, the beeping noises were people joining. We have over 130 people in the conference right now.
Oh, wow.
So this is the question. Are we supposed to be able to see? No. Yes, the slides will be. Okay.
Oh, the video. You couldn't hear the video. I'm so sorry about the video. The videos are on our YouTube channel. So if you'd like to see those videos, I'd highly recommend going to our YouTube channel. It's overwhelming with information, but those videos are up at the top because they're important, and you can use them in your advocacy as well. If you want to, there's lots there that you can use to explain to your patients, to your coworkers.
So Stephanie says, I was speaking with a coworker about you because I'm still on the camp. The disclosure should happen regardless of sex act. However, not wanting to perpetuate the create room for continued stigma of persons living with HIV. When do you, if at all, disclose HIV status? It's hard because of growing up during the height of the HIV epidemic. I feel like the residual fear has inhibited the ability to really embrace the you equals you. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. The residual fear has inhibited the ability to embrace it on a widespread scale, and it's old fears that we need to move past. But in terms of disclosing, what we say is, it's a personal choice, but there could be legal liability. There could be criminal liability. For me, I don't think there's an ethical reason to disclose when someone is not putting the other person at risk, but there may be a relationship issue. If someone doesn't disclose, even though they are not putting them at risk, the other partner may feel that there's a break in trust, or may feel that they were lied to in some way. So you have to think about, yes, ethically I don't think it's an issue, but relationship-wise, and what are the disclosure laws in your state? It doesn't matter if you're undetectable in many states. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Mijisha Wall, we're going to share the presentation in video and also a PDF version of it after a couple of hours. Ernesto Hernandez says there is still some people talking about reinfection, getting a different HIV virus. I think I know the answer, but in the age of PrEP, treatment and prevention, you equals you, isn't that outdated?
Yeah, it's definitely outdated. All reinfection and the superbug, it's really a myth. I mean, there was one potential case, as far as I know, with people with very low CD4 counts and suppressed immune system, but it's not something to worry about. I mean, and if it were something to worry about, there would, our researchers and the Department of Health and would be putting that message out. We'd be cautioning people. It's a big enduring myth. We just heard someone say that yesterday too. What about reinfection? It's a good question.
Rodrigo Garcia says, how could we avoid shaming folks who are not undetectable while promoting you equals you?
Yeah, that's a really important question, Rodrigo, and Mark King and St. Charles Stevens did a 2-hour workshop on Saturday about that, and we have a part of several of our slides. We talk about that. I mean, I think first it's about conscious communications and being really clear in, while celebrating you equals you, to acknowledge that some folks don't have undetectable viral loads, and there's no shame in that, and people who have a viral load that's detectable can still have hot and safe and healthy sex, and also to use you equals you as a public health argument to try to help get people the services they need so that they can have the option to be undetectable. And some folks have a low viremia. They just continually have low-level viremia and can't get to undetectable even when they're on treatment. And again, it's about conscious communications. But what we're also seeing is that some folks are now saying, well, I really want to say you equals you, but I'm not going to say it anymore because I don't want to offend anybody. And so now there's this, so we really have to address that message. It's a balance between, yes, we need to celebrate this and get it out urgently, because right now hundreds of thousands of people in the United States and their partners are suffering because they think that they're infectious. And people who want to harm them or prosecute them think they're infectious. So we've got to get this out urgently and not feel silenced, but also be conscious of the way we're communicating it.
Well, we wait from our questions. I just want to add that I'm reading that some people were not able to hear the videos. We have recorded this webinar and it's going to be posted in our Facebook page and our website, and then you will be able to listen to those videos that were part of the presentation. So anybody else, any questions for Bruce before we finish?
Oh, what is a blip? Okay, good question. So a blip is a transient increase in viral load, and what it means is it just happens like once or twice. And the level, I mean, it can be different levels. We've seen it defined up to 1,000, some up to 200, but it sometimes is a result of an error in testing or some sort of flu, but it's not anything to be worried about. There's a really good definition of blips on the NIH page, 10 things to know about viral suppression, and you can access that from our website. They have a really good summary of blips, and it's confidence building that you don't need to worry about them. You monitor them over time. If they continue over time, then maybe that means you change your treatment regimen.
Well, Stephanie and Ernesto, thank you very much. Any other questions for Bruce?
Should we scroll up?
Yeah. There's more. When we talk about sex in the context of U equals U, we include vaginal as well as anal sex?
Yep, that's a good question. It's any kind of sexual act. So vaginal, anal, oral, really any sexual act. And the studies were done on penile vaginal, penile anal. So good question.
We have 3 more minutes for more questions. Anybody would like to ask something?
We could play the song again.
Let me see.
Oh, you know what? We could put that screen up that shows how they get involved. Oh, yeah, and if you have any feedback on this presentation, we're always really open to feedback. There's a contact form on our website if you go to u=u.org or preventionaccess.org, and it's the confidential site. You don't have to put your name in form, but we always really love feedback. So any comments or further questions we will be happy to receive.
I think that's all for now. Oh, there's more. How do you leave feedback?
Oh, Stephanie, yeah, you can if you go to our website u=u.org and you check the contact button, and you can just send in feedback there, and we'll get it. And yeah, 200. Yeah, yep, that's an important point that it's under 200. We try to keep reinforcing that the number is 200. 200 copies per milliliter. So you could have a viral load of 180. In the United States, that's technically detectable, but you're still untransmittable. So it's 200.
I think Kyle's sharing something. You would like to read?
Oh, thank you, Kyle, for spreading the word. Thank you so much. That's great to hear that you're spreading the word, and congratulations to you and your husband.
Okay, it's almost 4. It's been an hour. It's been a wonderful webinar with a lot of information, very important information about what's happening currently in the world of HIV and AIDS. So thank you, Bruce, very much for supporting NLAAD this year with this webinar. Thank you for supporting the community on AIDS.
Thank you so much for having me. Anytime. And
All right.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in on this.
Thank you, guys.